Hi everyone, welcome to the Panhandle Research and Technology Tour Plus, hosted by the Panhandle Research and Extension Center in Scottsbluff, Nebraska. This event was recorded on December 2nd, 2020.
All right, good morning everyone. Just let me introduce myself. I'm Bob Harveson. I'm the Extension Plant Pathologist here for the Research Center. And I'm the host today for the next presentation, which is from John Thomas, who's in the Extension Educator for Box Butte County. And he'll be talking today about some of the work he's been doing for the last few years with the direct harvest of dry beans. So take it off. There, John, take off.
My name is John Thomas. I'm a Crops and Water Extension Educator in the Northern Panhandle of Nebraska. My office is in Alliance. And we have been doing research on the direct harvest of dry edible beans, different aspects of that for the past 8 years. And I am working directly with the Nebraska On-Farm Research Network, and we have studies clear across the state. The direct harvest of beans is simply harvesting the beans with one combine pass through the field, similar to the way they do soybeans. And that is opposed to the traditional method of windrowing with one process and then coming back, picking up those windrows with a combine sometime later. In the past 10 years, direct harvest has increased from 5% up to 20 to 25% in the Nebraska Panhandle, more common in the northern Panhandle than in the central Panhandle. In the 2020 farming season, I started off with 6 studies that we had laid out with populations and inoculants for one study, but we only ended up being able to harvest and collect good data off of 3 of those 6 studies. 1 was lost due to hail, and 2 couldn't be harvested for data because of terrible weeds. So I'll start off with our population studies. One was in Morrill County, and the other one was in Box Butte County. So we'll get started with our population study in Morrill County, which was planted near Angora. There's a lot of writing here, but I'll highlight a few things. It was planted on May 29th. It was planted in 20-inch rows, 60-foot wide deer planter, field length strips on a circle. The variety was Vibrant, which is a slow darkening pinto, and we put out 4 replications of each of the populations. The previous crop was corn, and it went into no-till, and it was rolled directly after planting, and then we went forward with a pre-emergent and then later a post-emergent herbicide program. Pretty good weed control, a few escapes, a few heavy spots, but it was manageable. It was desiccated on September 2nd, and then we harvested it on September 14th, and we will look at some of those results. On this table, we can see our results. Our target populations were 60, 100, and 130,000. The next column over, based on our stand counts, we actually only had a low population at around 46,381, mid population at 66,196, and our high population at 84,977, which is well below our target populations, but we'll go ahead and look at the results based on these populations. We did have a difference in pod heights among the populations, with the highest pod heights in the higher population. Harvest loss was not significantly different between the plots. The percent small beans were more percent small in the higher population, and our yields were in order of the populations from 33.9 bushel per acre in the low population to 39.2 bushel in the high population. And we had significant differences in marginal net returns. So in this case, in this study, the very low population of 46,000 did not perform as well as the, actually more normal population of almost 85,000. I would like to have gotten to our higher populations, and we will keep working on that from year to year. We have had aerial imagery the last couple years on our plots with the Terra Avion company. Unfortunately, this year, about mid-season, we found out that the company was going under, that it was no longer going to exist. So we didn't get the photos that we wanted, but I did get 2. On July 25th, you can see over on the left side the stripes going up and down. Those are a reflection of our different populations. Then again on August 7th, you can see the imagery, the vertical striping going up and down, reflecting our different populations. This field never had row closure, and I think that was part of the yields that weren't so great. And that was partially due, I think, to the hot, windy August that we had. We just didn't get a good closure on this field. Moving on to our population study in Box Butte County near Berea. A few highlights from the study. It was planted on May 26th in 20-inch rows with a 60-foot wide deer planter. The variety was Lumen, which is a slow darkening pinto, and we put out 4 replications. The beans followed sugar beets. From the previous year, the ground was ripped with a no-till ripper, then roller harrowed, then it was planted and rolled after planting. Then we went out with the pre-emergent herbicides, followed later by the post-emergent herbicides. We had some weeds, but pretty good weed control. The crop was then desiccated and harvested on September 19th. Again, looking at our results, our target populations were 60, 100, and 130,000. Actual population based on our stand counts were 52,478, 82,201, and 106,752. So better populations than the previous study, but they're still not up to our target, which we'll keep working for as we continue to do some studies. The pod heights were significantly different among the populations, and harvest loss was not significantly different between the populations. Percent small, not significantly different. Yields went in accordance with the populations from 52.9 bushel per acre up to 59.2 bushel per acre. From the low population to the high population, they were significantly different. And our marginal net returns were also significantly different, with the high population returning more economically than the low or the middle population. Looking at the Terra Avian imagery, in the upper field, you can see the horizontal lines, stripes across there representing the different populations in our study. This image was taken on July 16th. Looking at the same field on August 7th, you can just barely see the horizontal stripes there, the different populations. Good row closure in this particular field, which also reflected in the yields from 52 to 59 bushel per acre that we had at this location. Moving on to our inoculation study in Box Butte County. Not a lot of bean growers use an inoculant, but this grower wanted to use it and see if it would make a difference in his yields and so forth. So this field was drilled on June 5th in 15-inch rows, and the bean variety was Torion, a pinto bean. The product that was used was Verdesian in charge at 2.5 ounces for 50 pounds. There were 6 replications, and the treatments were just with and without the inoculant. So the field had 2 diskings, then it was rolled and then planted. The pre-post herbicide programs worked well, very little weed pressure in this field. And then finally it was harvested on September 22nd, and no desiccant was needed in this particular harvest. This is just a quick shot of the product bag, Verdesian in charge for dry edible beans. So this is what we used. Looking then at the results for the inoculated and no inoculated treatments, the stand counts were almost 11,000 difference, with the no inoculant having the higher number of plants. No adjustments were made to the drill in terms of planting population, so this is just a difference between the inoculated versus the no inoculant in population. So we see a difference there. As you look across the rest of the study, pod height, harvest loss, percent small, yield, and marginal net return, there were no significant differences when we analyzed the study. However, the no inoculant yielded slightly higher and also had a bit of a higher marginal net return. Statistically, did not see a difference. These are just a couple of images from this inoculation study. On the left, you see the planter, and then field later on in the season on the right. Moving on to our pinto population study in Box Butte County near Alliance. This study we weren't actually able to harvest because of weeds. Well, we harvested it, but we didn't get data. But it was planted between May 29th and June 2nd. And the reason for that was we had a planter breakdown, so it didn't all get planted at the same time exactly. Our target populations were 60,000, 100,000, and 130,000 as the studies before. This was planted in a 30-inch twin row configuration with cowboy pintos. 4 replications. It was planted, then rolled, and right after it was rolled, then the pre-emergent went on, which was Roundup, AIM, and Dual Magnum. Shortly after, the grower did start his pivot, but he only got a portion of the south end watered before the severe windstorm that came on June 6th. And that windstorm moved crop residue, corn leaves, dirt, soil, dust moved, and we think it displaced the herbicide on the north end of the field before it had a chance to get watered in. Therefore, the weed control, particularly on the north end of the field, was very poor. Came back with a post-emergent on June 26th. That was Raptor Basagran. Then we had very serious weed issues on that field this year, and I've got a few pictures to show you that. These images are of planting May 29th through June 2nd. In the left image, you can see the twin row configuration from the planting. This image was taken on July 9th. You can see that pretty serious weed issue there. Those weeds were impacted somewhat by the herbicide. The herbicide went on a little more than 2 weeks before this image, hoping that the weeds would go ahead and take a turn for the worse. But as you can see in the right-hand image on August 17th, the weeds really took off and grew and consumed a lot of the field. The image on the left was also taken on August 17th. There was a ton of kochia, there was pigweed, there was lamb's quarter, and as you can see in this image, there was quite a bit of Palmer amaranth there as well. We did harvest this on November 6th, which wasn't very long ago. The field ended up yielding on average about 23 bushel per acre. So pretty low yield, pretty hammered by the weed situation. This is the final dry bean planting population study that we did this year. It was with Great Northerns. It was up in Sheridan County. We couldn't harvest this one either because of the weeds. It was planted on June 4th, and it was drilled in 10-inch rows. The variety was Hydra, the Great Northern variety Hydra, 4 replications. There was no pre-emergent herbicide applied, and that was just by choice of the grower this year. And then post-application was put on July 3rd. Raptor Basagran was put on July 3rd. On July 24th, a rescue treatment of 2 pints of Basagran per acre was put on to try to get the weeds under control. And then finally, in late August, a rope wicking treatment of concentrated gramoxone was put on in an attempt to kill and knock down the weeds for the sake of harvest. So those were the procedures that were done on this field, and the weeds were very severe here. We ended up harvesting it on October 14th. The beans were actually swathed in windrowed into really big windrows with all the weeds, and then picket combine was used to harvest the windrows. The image on the left is in early July. You can see the very serious weed situation. The rescue treatment was put on after this. And the image on the right shows the August 17th condition and just the very serious weed problem that we had there. Kochia, lamb's quarter, and pigweed were very significant. There was some Palmer amaranth as well. The image on the left shows the result after the rope wicking. The rope wicking essentially killed the upper part of the weed where the product actually touched, but the bottom of the weed remained alive and green. On the right, you can see the windrows from the swather that were made, and then the picket combine went through. And actually, they got around 37 bushel per acre, which was, I think, really good considering all the weeds here. In summary then, also looking at some previous studies, for 10 studies over the previous 4 years, with populations ranging from 27,000 to 56,000 within the study, only 3 studies had significant yield differences with the greatest yields in the high populations. Only 1 study had a significantly different marginal net return, which was highest in the higher population as well. In 2020, both population studies had the highest yields and highest net marginal returns in the high population. However, this year, the high populations were only 85,000 and 106,000, with the low populations being in the 40s to low 50,000s plants per acre. So I want to look at low populations in the future that are in the 60,000 range, with high populations between 125 to 130,000 is what I've been targeting for several years, but I'm having a hard time getting to those higher populations. So still, I would have some concluding remarks that growers may be able to reduce seeding rates and save money while maintaining competitive yields. And I want to, again, like I said, look at this for a few more years. I also like to look at the inoculant study more than just 1 year in some different growing conditions, maybe more favorable growing conditions in the future. So then briefly with some general information about direct harvest of dry beans. Why direct harvest? Well, you have fewer harvest operations. May be difficult to find good labor for that early morning cutting operation. You can avoid the risk from wind or rain after cutting when those beans are out in the windrows. You don't disturb the soil, will maintain more residue, and then you will also have generally less soil through the combine. So then why isn't everyone direct harvesting? Well, it may take longer to get the crop out of the field in the fall. You may need to learn a new production system. You might need to buy a different combine head than your old one. The flex drapers are a good head, although the flex augers, I've seen those do a pretty good job. Maybe your neighbor has had a disaster with direct harvest. Another problem may be that you can't cultivate to control weeds if you've got your beans drilled or planted in narrower rows. And you may need to plant more seed per acre. I have a couple of question marks there. That's what we've been looking into the last few years, of that seeding rate. And your total harvest loss will normally be higher. 2 to 3 bushel per acre for direct harvest versus 1 to 2 bushel acre for your traditional harvest. Several things that are critical to the success of direct harvest would be suitable upright variety of bean, something that's going to generally hold the pods 2 inches above the ground or more at harvest. You need a very level field surface. You need to have a good weed control program because you probably won't be able to cultivate. You need a suitable header. Flex draper heads work well, as I said before. The auger heads can work okay. And you need to have an operator knowledgeable with adjustments and harvest speed and various things while you're doing direct harvest. Considering plant architecture, your type 1 bean is a determinate bush bean. They are upright. It'd be like your kidneys or cranberries. Your type 2 beans are indeterminate bush type beans, and a lot of your Great Northerns and pintos that are suitable for direct harvest will be this type 2 upright bean architecture. The type 3 beans are an indeterminate prostrate bean, and there are Great Northern and pinto varieties that are of this plant type, and those are the ones you would want to avoid for direct harvest. This image shows mature beans with a lot of pods hanging less than 2 inches above the ground. This would be a circumstance where you'd probably have a lot of harvest loss. This image shows bean architecture at maturity with most of the beans above 2 inches above the soil surface. This would be the type of bean that would help you reduce harvest loss. This slide shows getting off the combine and getting down and counting harvest loss during the combining process. There are things that you can do, adjustments you could make that could reduce the harvest loss during the harvest process. And this is a frame. I could get you instructions of how to build this frame. To count harvest loss, you can use a 1 square foot measurement. Out there, roughly 2 beans per square foot equals 1 bushel per acre. When you're counting harvest loss, you want to go to the different zones behind the combine on the left, center, and the right to determine an average harvest loss across those different spots randomly up the field. There has been a lot of contribution to these on-farm studies looking at dry edible beans, and I want to thank the Nebraska Dry Bean Commission, Kelly Bean, Trinidad. I want to thank our cooperating growers and the Nebraska On-Farm Research Network that's really helped put this together. You can see my contact information here if you'd like to get in touch with me. And thank you for participating today. And with that, I would take any questions.
All right, is there any questions for John? He's been doing this for quite a while, so he's really getting to be an expert on that topic. I don't see anything popping up here, but John, I'm just kind of curious about you said that there's more acreage that are doing direct harvest in the northern panhandle than the southern panhandle. You got any idea why?
Well, part of it is there's tended to be more furrow irrigation down here, you know, like around the river and so forth. Those guys don't tend to direct harvest. And I don't know, there's just maybe a little bit of a different attitude towards new innovations and so forth. Let me shut my phone off.
You're not supposed to have your cell phone on, John.
I know. So anyway, I don't know. I think there's a little bit of an attitude more up in the northern panhandle, a little bit more trying new things possibly. Not across the board, but anyway, it's all pivot up there, and that's more conducive to direct harvest.
Okay. Well, if anybody's interested in trying to advance into this stage, you talked about the type 2 Great Northerns and Pintos would be the ones that would be more likely to be successful for this. So can you give us, for those interested in this, what varieties that would include?
You know, there's some the Pintos are kind of ahead of definitely ahead of the Great Northerns in terms of the number of suitable varieties for upright, but some of the new slow darkening varieties are really good, or have a pretty good upright architecture. Vibrant, Radiant, Lumen, Palomino are some examples of that. I've seen.
You used that Lumen, right? And for one of these studies.
Yeah, that was in one of the studies. There's no guarantee on that uprightness. You can have a good upright variety, and then you can end up having some growth conditions or whatever, and your beans can go down. But generally speaking, these are some of the varieties that are good. But talk to your seed supplier and ask them about a really good upright variety. La Paz, I've done with Pintos. I've seen that used quite a bit. But yeah, the variety is maybe the most important factor in choosing or in planning to do direct harvest.
Okay. Well, in almost all your studies, it seems like the higher the population that you plant, you get a higher return, which is what you would expect, right?
Well, it's interesting. This year, I did not plan on planting. My lower populations were like 40 to 55,000, and that's too low. That's what I ended up having in my studies. And my highest population this year was up around 106,000.
Well, so, but in general, I guess what I'm trying to get at is that difference. And you have to plant more seed. So and obviously you'd be spending more money on that. But do you get the same or like does the return, is it high enough so that it pays for that extra seed if somebody were thinking about doing this? Do you have any idea on that?
I really do. I'm starting to have a better idea on that. It seems like, I mean, some guys were drilling beans and going up around 125, 130,000 plus. Mm-hmm. And I have been doing some studies that have been showing that, maybe the optimal population is more around that 90 to 100,000. Okay. And this year was a little different. I don't think the bean yields were off this year everywhere. And so in this year with my lower population levels, the higher populations did do the best, but those higher populations are actually what a normal population should be. If that makes sense.
Right. Here's some questions, I guess, that you had posed yourself. But is that what you would recommend at this point? The optimal rate, is it somewhere in that 90 to 100, 106, 105%, or 1,000?
Based off of my studies for the last, I guess the previous 4 years, at this point, I'm going to say that 90 to 100,000 is probably an optimal planting rate. And that when you're spending money on seed up to 125, 130,000, I don't think that extra seed is going to yield, improve your yield.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions? Well, I have another couple if we want to. John, you in for a couple more questions here?
Sure.
Okay. Well, one of these questions here is it's saying that the higher the population, the narrower the row space that they're drilled. But does that help them stay upright better than another type, or is it just the genetics of the plant?
I think again, I've just got through saying that I don't think really high populations are great, but I think a little bit narrower row spacing, and not real low populations, but maybe up around that 100,000 level, do help those beans support one another. Additionally, it's going to help get that row closure for weed control, which is very important. So I think, you know, not extremely high, but a good healthy population is very important.
Right. Well, but another thing I've noticed, at least on one of those studies, is that the higher populations tended to be a smaller seed size. Is that something that's consistent, or is that just that particular study?
I have seen that several times.
Okay.
That when I get up into the higher populations, they're still yielding. They're yielding okay,
Right.
but the seed size, it's an acceptable seed size. I mean, it will be taken by the you know, receiving people, but it's a little, you know, they kind of want a bigger seed.
Yeah.
So higher populations can get you a little bit smaller seed.
Let's see, I got one more here. In terms of the harvest loss, is there, how can you compare the direct harvest with the conventional one that they've been using for so many years? Is there a correlation there?
Well, based on some pretty extensive work that John Smith did a few years back now, he went to a number of different farms and went to the work of actually sifting through the ground, the soil in a traditional harvest setting. And he was finding on average with conventional harvest, guys are losing 1.5 bushel per acre. That can get worse if your windrows blow, or if your windrows get rained or snowed on, things can happen. But on an average, 1.5 bushel per acre loss, traditional harvest. Direct harvest with pintos, I think you're looking between, on an average, 2 to 2.5 bushel per acre loss. On the Great Northerns, maybe 3 to 3.5 bushel per acre harvest loss, or just some real general figures.
And that's about the cutoff point, isn't it? You don't want to lose much more than three per acre.
You know, if I see more than 4 bushel per acre, I start getting a little bit concerned. I think, okay. I mean, I have seen 16 bushel per acre harvest loss, just disasters out there. But 4 bushel per acre and above, I start, you know, getting some concern.
Okay. Is there any other questions from anyone else? Okay, here's one, Emily Stein, to everyone. You mentioned 2 different kinds of heads to harvest with. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, the flex heads, I think, are very important, and that's where the base of that header kind of contours along the ground, getting as close to the ground as possible. There is a flex draper head, and the draper is what actually feeds the beans into the center, you know, into the center housing of the combine. A second type of a flex head is an auger head. They're a little bit older style, but the beans are cut. The reel tines move the beans onto the header, and then an auger would move the beans into the center to be fed into the combine. And so I've seen a pretty good job done with the flex auger heads, but I think the technology has continued to get better with flex drapers, with better, closer contact to the ground, the header spacing from the ground. And so I just think that with the technology that's come with the drapers has also come a better flex system and better, less harvest loss.
Okay.
And then there's, you know, the older heads that have no flex at all. And if your field was absolutely flat as a pancake with no variation, you know, a guy might do okay, but I really am going to recommend a flex head for direct harvest.
Okay. Well, Jeff's just asking a question for everyone, including John here. Is it, and he's asking, do you think standing residue would serve as an alternative to narrow row spacing in the sense of supporting upright beams?
I have, again, John Smith did some planting. I can't remember every detail of the study, but they sprayed down some, I think it was wheat, and planted beans into that stubble. And I think, you know, there are some possibilities of, if some residue could help keep those beans stay upright. I think there are some possibilities there. For plant architecture, a guy'd have to also study out and just see if the beans grew and yielded as well in that environment as well. But I think it's an area worth doing some research.
There's still a lot of questions, John, but you're doing a good job with this particular aspect, and keep on doing it.
All right, thank you.